No problem. Well, welcome to the keynote today, and I welcome everyone participating this Saturday morning or afternoon. So I wanted to just do the keynote. We also have a great webinar presentation from Dr. Sten. And so I wanted to do a 15-minute segment about how everyone should ask themselves whether or not the PMF will help with their particular condition that they're looking for, or whether or how it will help with their expectations. So I wanted to get into that because technically we are really not, we're focused on health. We're not focused on disease or illness or any diagnosis. And I'm going to explain that to you and explain why. But we really are focused on health, and it's everyone's responsibility to know your biometrics, to know your numbers, your vital signs, and to work your health or manage your health and lead a healthy lifestyle, particularly in the age of the pandemic. You really need to know your biometrics and how you can move them to positive baseline numbers. Because what we're seeing in this environment is that biometrics such as temperature and SpO2 and blood pressure, all of these biometrics all constitutes how well your body is functioning and overall indicators of a healthy lifestyle. So I wanted to set that perspective out here and then allow us all to go into what we need to know as the foundations. And I've presented this before, but I wanted to do it again because really, if you can focus on this slide here and really understand it, you will understand how to apply pulse electromagnetic fields, particularly magnetic resonance stimulation, and how that relates to the functioning of your body and the improvements. And I always say physics mediates chemistry, which activates biology. And the particular physics we're using here is we're using magnetic field parameters. And these magnetic field parameters are constructed in order to follow Faraday's law of induction and the principle of resonance. So those is the physics that we are using to modify chemistry. And the chemistry which we are focused on potentially modifying is resulting in improved transport of charges, which induce electrical currents within inside of the body. So we're using physics to modify chemistry in order to get the mechanism of action, which is the transport of charges, which may induce electrical currents within inside the body. And then the positive benefits is transmembrane voltage potentials, cellular function, and overall system coherence. So I wanted to add in a particular quote, and it is from Mark Markov, and he had written a great book about electromagnetic fields. And the centuries of development of natural sciences provide enough evidence to claim life is an electromagnetic event. And biomagnetism is an area of science that deals with magnetic fields that are generated by biological systems. And magnetobiology is the studies the effects of exogenous magnetic fields when applied to biological objects. And pulse electromagnetic fields are physical stimulus that affect biological systems through the generation of coherence or interfering fields that modify fundamental electromagnetic frequencies generated by living organisms. Some could refer to this as the human biofield. So physics is the intended use of the IMRS prime, the Omnium 1 2.0, particularly the whole body mass. So the intended use is to generate specific magnetic field parameters which increase the probability of modifying the ionic flow. Chemistry is the mechanism of action that is induced. So we're moving ionic movement with the result of inducing electrical currents in the body. And the The benefits to biology is, of course, voltage, cell membrane potentials. And any benefit that is experienced by pulsed electromagnetic fields, particularly magnetic resonance stimulation, is due to the fact of we are inducing voltage. And I will go on and further explain why this is such. So the magnetic field parameters that are generated outside a body can be viewed as exogenous fields, and the magnetic field parameters that interact with the body's natural endogenous magnetic fields. So the body's natural endogenous magnetic fields are created from the movement of electrical charges, which in turn generates electrical currents and magnetic fields within the tissues. Since all potentials are controlled by charge, they can therefore be influenced by various specified magnetic field parameters. And this is the whole reason, the intent of use of the IMRS Prime and the Omnium 1 2.0 whole body mats, pillow pads, and spot applicators. It's all about moving charges, creating ionic movement. And what's great about magnetic resonance stimulation is that it obeys the first rule, which is do no harm. And the reason why it does no harm is because magnetic resonance stimulation uses specified magnetic field parameters as a transport medium. And these magnetic field parameters pass through the biological tissues unhindered. And this may result in inducing deep charges in the body. And because the magnetic resonance stimulation, the PEMF, induces a physiological ionic movement in tissue, they can only produce as much charge as the biological organism is naturally capable of. So you are not able to overcharge your body or harm yourself by utilizing an excessive amount of magnetic resonance stimulation. It will act just like your cell phone. Once your cell phone's at 100, keeping it on the charger is basically just a waste of electricity. And that's how Wolfgang always talks about it. Really, any more than 24 minutes on a whole body mat is just a waste of electricity because your body will not charge past its natural conditioning. And because we are using the principle of resonance, we are not forcing the body to do this. And that is why it is a class 1 PMF device, and there is a low risk to the user, and they are targeted for particularly home use in almost every single individual, unless you have one of the contraindications: pregnancy, epilepsy, or electrical implants. So that's huge, and that really helps you dictate how much intensity or how much time and duration. You really do not need to go over 24 minutes. If you really want to utilize the device in the best manner, you would do multiple sessions of, say, 16 minutes throughout the day on the whole body mat, because one application of 48 minutes does not do you any more benefit. You would actually get more benefit by doing 3 16-minute sessions throughout the day. So keep that in mind. More time on the whole body mat is not more beneficial to the body. It's better to do smaller amounts throughout the day and on a consistent daily, weekly basis in order to get the best benefits. Because with magnetic resonance stimulation, you have the time-weighted average of magnetic field exposure. So the more consistently you do it, the more benefits that you will see. And the 2 laws which I spoke about, which is utilized in the magnetic field parameters, is Faraday's law of induction. And this principle is used to increase the probability of ionic movement, which is separating charges within inside the body. And this action may improve membrane voltage potentials. And the principle of resonance is a concept that is used to synchronize coherence within the body It's also referred to as establishing frequency resonance inside the body. And just on a side note, they have done studies and have found that people who are depressed have low coherence compared to healthy individuals. So there is a link between your body's frequency resonance, your coherence, and mood alterations, such as this research which presented depression. And as we always say, all diseases are eventually the outcome of damaged cellular function. And this is really what we're focused on and we're working on. We're working on improving cellular function, since we know that all diseases are eventually the outcome of damaged cellular function. So how, by leading a healthy lifestyle, utilizing PEMF, can we mitigate damaged cellular function? And that is where voltage comes in. A sound cell works at a voltage between 70 to about 110 millivolts to deliver ATP particles, which is the energy of the cell, which are crucial for a healthy body. When a cell gets damaged, the voltage ranges between 40 to 50 millivolts, and this much voltage is not enough to produce ATP, and hence the cell loses energy. And you can see on the left-hand side, the graph, what happens to a cell once it drops below 50 millivolts. It can be considered in a danger zone. And in order to improve cell membrane function and stimulate ATP production, the body, the transporters, they move ions against the concentration gradient using energy such as ATP. So the body is creating this inequality by moving ions around in order to stimulate cell function. And this is the same mechanism of action that PEMF is doing. PEMF is separating charges, creating inequality in order to stimulate cell functioning, because separating charges is the key to life. The unequal distribution of just a few key ions between the intra and extracellular fluid and the selective movement through the plasma membrane governs the electrical properties of the cell. So this energy, which can be stored, and it then can use to drive cell growth, cell repair, cell replacement, and cell reproduction. And what is important is that the magnetic field parameters interact with the tissues that occur with the separation of charges, and they result in electrical currents being generated in magnetic fields. And this is all done by mitigating ions, by separating charges. And when you improve the cell membrane function, you improve the voltage, you are actually helping mitigate any cellular functions that may be diminished due to a diseased condition. And this is why when you look on MedPub or Google Scholar, it seems like PEMF helps everything, and it does, because it is working on the cellular level and not on any disease or illness condition with magnetic resonance stimulation. And this is also why when you read a lot of research, you get conflicting results, because they are not targeting a specific diseased state. They are targeting cellular function that could be inhibited due to poor voltage, poor cell membrane potentials. And that is the key in how you would always look at everything, and why when people ask about all these different diseases and illnesses, I say it doesn't do anything with the particular disease and illness. What it is doing is mitigating any issues from cellular dysfunction. And living in the age of a pandemic, when we're surrounded with sedentary quarantines and lack of parks and beaches and gyms being open, we are falling into sedentary lifestyle complications, which may lead to losses of function. And how can we mitigate this and mitigate any contributing factors cellular dysfunction could have in regards to chronic disease management or preventing anything escalating further? This whole process is not something that nature also doesn't take advantage of. And as a naturopath, I always say, if you have a problem, look to nature, because nature has already solved it. And who created nature? This picture depicts, on the upper left-hand corner, is the Hilton Fort Lauderdale Beach Resort. And what the Hilton did was it put wind turbines on the top of its roof, because it is harvesting the wind that is coming from the ocean in order to generate electricity for the hotel. And the inequality in air pressure creates movement, which turns the turbines. So you can think of the inequality the pulsed electromagnetic wave creates with inside of the body, moves the ions, which in turn turns the cell's machinery. It turns the cell's function. So we're basically utilizing the same concept. So by expanding energy and creating artificial inequality, in the case of the body, it pumps ions to where they don't want to be, and then harvest and stores this energy as the system returns to equilibrium. So basically, the body pushes ions to where they don't want to be in order to create inequality. And when the system tries to put itself back together, it harvests the energy that is created by the electrical currents that are coming. And if anyone is familiar with Dr. Jerry Tennant, he had discussed this concept as well too. To repair and heal cells, they needed an environment of -50 millivolts. Inadequate voltage is a characteristic of all chronic disease. Either you do not have the necessary voltage to run the cell, or the higher voltage needed to make new cells. You need double the normal voltage to repair or replace damaged cells. And the example that Dr. Tennant stated is that the reason people get macular degeneration is that they lose the -50 millivolts they need to make new cells every 48 hours inside of the eye. And those cells wear out and they don't get replaced. You need to give your body all of the material needed to replace those macular cells. And so when you think about that, that is what we are doing. We are not treating any type of degenerative disease. We are treating the voltage potentials that are required in order to replace and renew cells in order so that they do not fall into a state of dysfunction. And going back to the weather, we see this all around us. So as the wind blows from areas of high pressure to those of low pressure, the winds are a manifestation of inequalities in pressures in the system and the natural tendency to smooth the differences out. So the wind is generally on a rudimentary level created because the high pressures and the low pressures try to balance each other's out and go back to a state of equilibrium. And in doing so, it creates the wind, the energy, which drives the turbines, which drives the functioning of the hotel. We're using a pulse magnetic field to create inequality in order to create energy and improve cellular function in order to run the body. So it is all related, and it is all utilizing natural principles of physics in order to improve the body. You also need all the necessary raw materials like nutrients required to make new cells. You need to address any toxins and that might be damaging cells. So PEMF is an adjunctive therapy. You still need exercise. You still need healthy nutrition. PEMF is not making sodium. PEMF is not putting oxygen into your body. You still need to do all of this because it's a part of a healthy lifestyle, and that is what we're all living in now. We're not going to be flying on planes and eating out at all the restaurants anymore. We're going to have a completely different life, and it is going to be a life focused on maintaining health. All of this is accomplished with the whole body mat, whether it's the IMRS Prime or the Omnium 1 2.0. because of a triple sawtooth waveform. So the principle of physics, where we're using magnetic field parameters, Faraday's law of induction, and the principle of resonance, is all accomplished through complex wave formations. And as you can see on the top picture here, a triple sawtooth is created by the summation of a whole bunch of sine waves. And sine waves are individual frequencies. So when you put all of these sine waves together, you're generating multiple frequency spectrums that are being delivered. And the efficiency of a PEMF device is also dependent on the frequencies and the waveforms that are utilized. So when you're comparing PEMF devices or comparing any device, you need to ask yourself, what is the waveform and what are the frequencies being utilized? That's the first question when comparing devices. And when a time-varying pulsed electromagnetic field is generated with complex waveforms and frequency spectrums, these magnetic field parameters can be utilized as adjunctive treatments and have been shown to improve conditions and increase healing times. So when you compare a waveform with a lower rate of change, it does not deliver a sufficient current in the tissue. And one of the best and most beneficial waveforms is the sawtooth. The sawtooth waveform is produced by your brain. The sawtooth waveform is produced by your olfactory nerve in your nose, which, interesting enough, is also inhibited due to viruses. And the IMRS system creates these sawtooth waveforms by generating two pulse trains of various frequencies and amplitudes. The system then adds another harmonic frequency to the original pulse train, resulting in a change to the summated wave. And that is what you can see is how it begins to create a sawtooth formation out of the sine wave formation. The IMRS systems then continue to add harmonic frequencies to the ninth harmonic, thus achieving a nearly perfect sawtooth waveform with the desired rapid rise and sharp fall times. And creating a broad spectrum of frequencies increases the probability of frequency resonance and ionic modulation. So they are using the law of induction and principle of resonance in order to utilize it to modify ionic flow and induce currents in the body. And all of this is creating the induction in the body's tissue. And so when you move these charges is what creates the cellular voltage. So a best practice every morning, because also what they're finding is that when we sleep, our body begins to frequency decouple. And when we wake up, our body needs to couple itself, put itself back into coherence again. And that's why it is very important in the morning to do stretches, to do mindfulness work, to prepare yourself for the day, because you are still putting your body back into a state of coherence from your time spent sleeping. They're also contributing this to the possibility of one of the factors that cause strokes more frequently in the morning versus at other times of day, because the body is decoupled. What else voltage does is it helps with blood viscosity. And blood viscosity is the intrinsic resistance to flow. And so that has a physical measure called the shear rate, and that is defined as the ratio of velocity difference between 2 points divided by the difference of those 2 points. So in low shear conditions, the tendency of red blood cells to aggregate becomes more prominent. This is the rouleau formation that we talk about on the bottom left-hand corner, which causes exponential increase of viscosity and decreases shear rates. So it is all created due to poor shear conditions. And blood viscosity has an important influence on tissue perfusion, because a rise in an increase in viscosity may decrease tissue perfusion, which is oxygenation, nutrients deliver. And so this is one of the baselines we can measure, SpO2. Several studies have shown a linkage between whole blood viscosity and the hemodynamics of hypertension. And if anyone has been paying attention to the news, there was just a report out of New York that every single death with the coronavirus in New York, the patient had hypertension, high blood pressure. So what can we do to live a healthy lifestyle in the age of a pandemic? We can monitor our blood pressure and do acts that improve our blood pressure or maintain our healthy blood pressure ranges. We know people are measuring SpO2, which is the oxygenation of the tissues, because we know viruses love anaerobic conditions which lack oxygen. So if the body's oxygen saturation begins to low, we are now able to catch that early on. So if you have a whole week of data and all of a sudden it starts to change, that could be a sign that maybe you should reach out to your healthcare professional. Also important with blood viscosity is circadian variation, the circadian rhythms, which correlates with the change in hemocratic during the day. And hematocratic is basically the volume of red blood cells that are in the fluid. And during the day, this changes, and then the circadian variations change your plasma protein levels, all based on the time of day, depending on what rhythms your body is producing. And guess what? The whole body mats with all our devices incorporate organ clocks and circadian rhythm influences on the magnetic field parameters being delivered into the body. The circadian rhythm may also explain the increased incidence also in strokes in the morning. So blood viscosity plays an important role in pathophysiology of vascular diseases as a determining factor of global cardiovascular load and a factor affecting regional tissue perfusion. So we are not working on any type of cardiovascular diseases. What we are working on is conditions that contribute to poor health because of low shear conditions. And microcirculation, all of these things are improved because we are improving shear conditions within inside of the body. High blood viscosity also correlates with inflammation, systematic inflammation. And an important contributor to increased viscosity is the amount of red blood cells volume, a higher level of inflammatory proteins, and the loss of your red blood cells flexibility. And that is because your blood cells begin to lose voltage, lose power, they lose their positive charge, and they begin clumping together, again, in that Rouleau effect. So when you increase the voltage, your red blood cells begin to plump up again. And what we know is that like charges repel like charges. So the cell membranes, which all have the same charges, repel each other. But when they lose voltage, the force diminishes, and that's when they begin or may begin clumping together. So just by separating charges and charging your red blood cells, you're improving conditions which could lead to hypertension, systematic inflammation, poor tissue perfusion, oxygen that's in the tissues. That could lead to anaerobic conditions, which make prime environments for such things as viruses, cell dysfunction. So all of this is what is the mechanism of action when you improve the voltage potentials within inside of the body. And I'm going to do real quick, because some of these I'm going to review again on the 7 p.m. webinar. So I just want to go through the next ones real quick. But we're going to go into sedentary lifestyle conditions and how all of this is a contributing factor. Also, thank you for people who keep reminding me to mention water, because hydration is hugely important. What we know is that most fluids in the body are actually electrolytes, and those are ions dissolved in liquid. And the fluids in the extracellular space, which carry current by charged ions, are sodium, potassium, and calcium. all that have been contributing to the beneficial actions of pulsed electromagnetic fields. And I'm just going to touch on this real quick, but structured water holds and delivers energy. This negatively charged water is found in your cells and extracellular tissue. And the way you recharge this structured water is through sunlight. Sun exposure structures water in your body, which provides greater energy. This also will relate to far infrared, and we'll get into that later. But remember, the best practice on a whole body mat is hydrate, do the body mat, and then do some type of stretches. Whether that be just regular stretches you learned in gym class, or whether that's actually yoga or Pilates, or whether it's just a series of stretches that you like to do because it makes you feel good. But the best practice with a whole body mat is you do not need more than 24 minutes. You should be hydrated before you get on that. And then afterwards, you should do some type of stretching. I also wanted to bring up that there is so much talk now about telehealth and how it's going to create a different healthcare system after the virus. And this was an article with the Humana CEO. And the one thing I just wanted to point out, and we're going to talk about this more this evening, is that more healthcare services are being performed in the home going forward. So patients don't necessarily need to go into the hospital. And this is exactly where we come in here at Swiss Bionics. We are not dealing with disease, illness, or diagnosis. We are dealing with improving the cell membrane functions with voltage and improving the overall functioning of the body's vital signs, the biometrics, blood pressure, heart rate variability, heart rate, SpO2, temperature. All of these things, once they begin to fail or move into warning areas, show us that the body is entering into a state of disease or illness. And if we can catch all of this stuff early on enough, it can all be mitigated with exercise, with nutrition, and with complementary adjunctive medical equipment. And this will all be done within the home.